All right, let's talk about one of the most brilliant and frankly confusing poems in English literature, John Dryden's Absalom and Achitophel. It was published way back in 1681, and it's this absolute masterpiece of political takedown. But here's the thing, to really get what's going on, you need a secret key.
And that's the big question, isn't it? How on earth did a story from the Bible become the most vicious piece of political propaganda of the century? I mean, this poem isn't just a retelling of an old tale. Nope. It's a coded attack, a literary weapon aimed squarely at the most powerful people in England during a massive national crisis. So how did he pull it off?
Well, the key that unlocks this whole thing is a literary tool called allegory. Think of it like a story that's got two layers. On the surface, you're reading about ancient kings and rebels. But just underneath that, there's this hidden, real-world drama playing out. And once you see that second layer, everything clicks into place.
So, to really get the poem, we first have to get the world it came from. And believe me, this was not some quiet academic time. This was Restoration England, a country totally on a knife's edge, haunted by the memory of a brutal civil war and absolutely terrified that another one was about to kick off.
You know, it's pretty wild how fast things went south. In 1660, King Charles II comes back to the throne and everyone's hoping for a little stability, but there's a huge problem. He doesn't have a legitimate heir. That means the crown is supposed to go to his brother James, who is very publicly a Catholic. Then, in 1678, this completely made-up conspiracy theory called the Popish Plot explodes, and it creates this massive wave of anti-Catholic paranoia. This all just boils over into what we call the exclusion crisis, where Parliament literally tries to pass a law to exclude a Catholic from ever taking the throne. The country was completely torn in two.
And out of this chaos, England's first real political parties were born. On one side, you've got the Whigs. They're led by this guy, the Earl of Shaftesbury, and they are dead set on excluding the Catholic heir. They're shouting from the rooftops about the dangers of popery and tyranny. And then on the other side, you've got the Tories. They're backing the King, Charles II, and they defend the traditional line of succession. For them, the monarchy was chosen by God, period. This was the battleground.
Okay, so we've got the history down. Now comes the really fun part. It's time to actually crack this code. Let's pull back that curtain and see who these biblical figures really are.
So the poem is filled with characters you might know from the Old Testament story of King David and his son Absalom, who leads a rebellion. But here's the secret. Every single one of them is just a stand-in, a mask for a major political player in 17th century London. So, who's who?
First up, the hero of the story, the wise, patient, and merciful King David. Well, that's none other than King Charles II himself. Dryden portrays him as this patient ruler who's just trying his best to hold the kingdom together while surrounded by enemies.
And what about David's handsome but very rebellious son, Absalom? That would be the Duke of Monmouth. Now, he was Charles's illegitimate son, but he was Protestant and super popular with the people, which made him the perfect candidate for the Whigs to rally behind.
And, of course, the master villain, the treacherous advisor, Achitophel, the one whispering poison in Absalom's ear. This is a direct, and I mean savage, caricature of the Earl of Shaftesbury, the ambitious leader of the Whigs.
And the allegory doesn't just stop with the big three. It's incredibly detailed, like a full cast list for this political drama. You've got King David as Charles II, Absalom as the Duke of Monmouth, and the scheming Achitophel as the Earl of Shaftesbury. But look, it keeps going. A character named Zimri is a stand-in for the foolish Duke of Buckingham, and another named Shimei represents the radical politicians whipping up public anger. Dryden basically put his entire world on blast, all safely hidden inside a Bible story.
Now, it's so important to remember, this wasn't just some clever literary game. Dryden was the poet laureate. That's the king's official writer. His job was to win a war of public opinion, and his weapon of choice was poetry.
And what an arsenal he had. He used these things called heroic couplets, these elegant, rhyming lines that could deliver the most brutal attacks while sounding incredibly classy and final. He painted these razor-sharp character portraits that just perfectly exposed his enemies' flaws for everyone to see. He was a master of irony, where he'd pretend to praise someone just to cut them down even more effectively. And by wrapping it all in a Bible story, he made the king's side of the argument feel like it was ordained by God himself. Just brilliant.
To really see his style in action, just listen to this description of Zimri, who, remember, is the Duke of Buckingham. A man so various that he seemed to be not one but all mankind's epitome.
Now, at first glance, that almost sounds like a compliment, right? Wow, he's so versatile, he's like all of humanity rolled into one. But what Dryden is really saying is that the guy has no principles, no focus, no consistency, that he's just a chaotic mess of a person. It is an absolutely devastating takedown, gift-wrapped in a perfectly polished rhyme.
So, look, the exclusion crisis eventually ended. All these politicians are long gone. So why in the world are we still talking about this poem more than 300 years later? Well, it's because Dryden did something pretty remarkable.
He tapped into ideas and struggles that are just timeless, that constant tug-of-war between ambition and loyalty, the fight to maintain order against the forces of chaos, the power of political spin and outright manipulation, the tricky difference between having a legal right to rule and actually being popular. These are the fundamental conflicts in almost any political society, back then and right now.
When you boil it all down, Dryden's real genius was taking a piece of straight-up political propaganda and turning it into a deep and lasting work of art. He took the heat and anger of one specific political moment and forged it into this incredible reflection on leadership, on betrayal, and on just how fragile a nation can be.
And that kind of leaves us with one last really fascinating question to chew on. Let's be honest. Absalom and Achitophel was definitely propaganda. It was written to politically destroy the king's enemies. But it's also, without a doubt, a literary masterpiece. So it makes you wonder, where exactly is that line between powerful political art and just outright propaganda? And maybe more importantly, can something be both at the exact same time? Something to think about.